Hello and welcome, everybody, to the fifth part of our series, Women Take on the Digital Divide. I'm delighted that we are discussing space technology today because I think it is a field of science. Now it's a little bit. I'm very sorry, but I can hear myself now. It's really a little bit weird because.
Close the live stream.
Okay, yeah. Sorry. Classic. Okay, so I'm delighted that we are discussing space technology today because I think it's a field of science that we can learn a lot from, especially regarding living on the Earth and not necessarily on Mars. I'm even more delighted that we could win Yvette Gonzalez for this evening's talk, and I will introduce her in a couple of minutes. There are different angles in how space technology can help us managing life on Earth. There are communication satellites that provide access to phone and internet service to almost any location on Earth, which is particularly important during times of disaster and recovery, like when an earthquake or a cyclone hits. With positioning satellites, we can track endangered wildlife because they can tell us where they are. And there are also Earth observation satellites that tell us what's going on in our environment, and we all know there is a lot going on right now. We can even learn something about sustainable agriculture with tiny microbes which convert carbon dioxide into a nutritious carbon-rich crop. So that is just a glimpse of life on Earth supported by space technology. And I'm looking forward to learning more about those and other opportunities tonight. My name is Francesca Schmidt, and I'm the Senior Program Officer for Feminist Digital Policy in the Gunnar Wörner Institute for Feminism and Gender Democracy at the Heinrich-Böll Foundation in Berlin. We, as the Gunnar Wörner Institute, have been working on feminist digital policy since 2014, and maybe this talk will open up a new space of interest not only for you as listeners, but also for our work in political education. I want to take this opportunity to thank my cooperation partner, Nakima Steffelbauer from Frauenloop, with whom this event and the event series as a whole could not take place today. Nakima is the founder of Frauenloop, a non-profit organization founded to expand the number of qualified women entering the tech industry. So, and now I'm thrilled that Yvette Gonzalez, the Chief Operation Officer at International Institute for Astronautical Science, will give us an introduction on the question space and tech, who on Earth is focused on the stars. Yvette is a human resilience expert, astropreneur and Project Possum scientist, astronaut candidate. I'm sure we will learn something about that today too. With 20 years of development and emergency response experience, rebuilding communities in active war, conflict, natural disasters, she adapts her skills to focus on human factors in space technology, flight, and experiences. Yvette aims to be one of many future Native Americans to conduct research in space and support space settlement education, science, technological efforts, missions, and policy dialogue. And now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Yvette Gonzalez. Yvette, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me today. And thank you so much for allowing me to share and contribute to this ongoing dialogue. So I thank you both and for the Institute for hosting this important topic and this conversation. As you said, I am based in Berlin, but I have a very long history globally. And so before I start, I'd just like our Institute is founded on Native American land. And so we do our land acknowledgement. And the Institute would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout the world and their connections to land, water, the stars, and community. And the IS is based on land within the territories of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. So we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and we extend that respect to all Indigenous peoples who are listening today. So you can go to the next slide. Just a little bit of context about me. So I'm very passionate about this topic, and I have been speaking to Nakima and to a few colleagues in the past few weeks about how space matters and why I'm even involved. So I have over 2 decades working in humanitarian work. And what that means is that I started out my career not in space, but wanting to give back to humanity. I wanted to respond to disasters and then quickly learn I wanted to mitigate and prevent them. So I spent the last 2 decades doing that in over 45 countries, I would say, to date. And what that means is that I'm an early responder, and I help communities revitalize. So looking at every part of their ecosystem and part of how do they revitalize into a point of thriving. When I realized that I wanted to do more, which sounds a bit like you're doing humanitarian, why would there possibly be a need to do more? I wanted to give back in a different way. And it just so happened that I had colleagues who had crossed over to the space industry. And I said, okay, well, how can I adapt my skills and how can I be involved and how can I contribute and participate? Because clearly there's something at work that's driving my life and it's influencing it, and how do I become part of it? And so in 2018, I did that. So I started working at this institute, the International Institute for Astronautical Science. And I have jumped into how do I bridge that humanitarian experience I had, and how do I make sense of space technology, and where do I bridge that? So today I'll be sharing a bit about why does it matter, where in our lives does it touch, and how can you participate? How can you be involved? And why should you be involved? The next slide. So I start with what I do in science. Part of a team that I have to say is 64% at this point, women. I was pretty shocked to come in and find that there were women from Kenya, Mali, France, Ireland, and we were all working together to contribute to spacesuit technology and bioastronautics. So you see here, a lot of what we do is in a pressurized spacesuit environment, we test all the components of what it feels like to be a human inside of that technology, and how can we make it better, not just for human spaceflight, but also for biomedical research. How can we make human factors more accessible? And so in these two, you see one is prepping and one is in a microgravity flight. So this is actually a happy moment right before we were floating, free floating. Next slide. And all of the research from that actually goes out into space agencies, research institutes, and we publish it. And we also are ambassadors to STEM and STEAM for young women, young girls, and other underrepresented groups. So this research isn't just for the scientists who are using it and creating it, but it's also for us as humans using it. And especially because we have diverse backgrounds, it's how do we put our input into the final outcome? So here you'll see we work on 3D printing technology for creating gloves. We work at dexterity. And in fact, we have access to Apollo test sites and current NASA test sites to actually use this kind of technology on the moon, Mars, and then how does it make tools more useful on Earth? So a lot of this work right here is what we create, we design, and then we implement it ourselves, testing it to failure. And then how does that make sense? Like, why would I need to do this here on Earth? What does all this investment in my space technology mean to me? And what does it mean to my neighbors? And what does it mean to you at large? Well, I'll show you that here's a few examples, both at a granular level, like in your household level, and then at a policy level, what that would look like. So you can go to the next slide. A lot of what we do in the last two slides, that tech work, that research, the evaluations, it's fun. It's a lot of hard work. It's a long longitudinal contribution from our sides, but eventually the outcomes can be surprising. When people ask me, why should we have our tax dollars going to space? I say, well, there's a few things that have come from space that I think we take for granted, but if you do know about it, you'll recognize that there's so much to be gained. It's not that things wouldn't happen without space, it's that they happen faster. And so in your own cabinet, and here I obviously gave away what's in my cabinet, canned food was actually the safety protocol for all canned food in the world came as a result of NASA taking on Pillsbury and consulting for microbiology research. And in the early 70s, there were cases of botulism and death from botulism, and they used all of the science that they had at NASA for food for astronauts and said, why can't we apply this to our regular canned food and make the market safer. So today it's thanks to that work that was done in the 60s and 70s that you have safety standards around all of your packaged food. I think, well, I'm on mine, but everybody probably has a laptop now or access to one if you're watching today. The laptop wasn't the invention, the computer was the invention. The foldable laptop was part of a necessity for space. And this one was actually sent up in 1982. And when the technology worked, it was adapted for use for carrying these with us and being able to have portable laptops. So a lot of the convenience and being able to really shrink technology also came from what were the necessities to go to space. So these are only two examples, but I will tell you, if you go online, there is, since 1976, a spin-off magazine, and it's a blog now online. There are over 1,800 items that have been considered spin-off technology from space, and over 30,000 applications of space technology from that. So the amount of things like thermometers to take your temperature at home without contamination, your water filters, paved roads. A lot of the technology we see and is around us came from space. Next slide. So that's something that happens at the household level. But there's a lot of things Wi-Fi, internet, all the satellites out there are doing in our daily life that is invisible. If you look at this first top image from the European Space Agency, I really love that they did this because it shows that all the objects that are floating in and around Earth in orbit are beyond comprehension in number. Right now, as of January, actually, there are 3,372 satellites actively orbiting the Earth. And that's just those that are active. There are a lot that are not, that are decommissioned and still floating. So in this image you see, while we can't see that, that is what we're facing for pollution, collisions. And the reason we should be concerned is twofold, actually manyfold, but I'll explain two. One, if there's a collision, it can be catastrophic. It can create multitude of debris. You know, you crash two things together, it becomes more. It can also collide into live aircraft, and become dangerous. It can also knock down satellites that we're using for our own technology. So our Wi-Fi could go out because of a collision. But also astronomers who are studying planets, the origins of the universe, and still doing all of this work to find out how we could even thrive off Earth, can't see. And so there's a large movement of astronomers who are trying to find out how can we deorbit safely all of the space traffic. That way we can actually have a future where we can still study the universe. And it's a heated and contentious topic because you still see launches every day, right? You go on and there's excitement around another launch. Well, those launches are launching more satellites. And what we're learning from that is that a lot of times, just like in the maritime industry and other industries, the technology comes before the policy. And so a lot of space scientists and people in the space industry are focused on space traffic management, which is looking at how do we not only manipulate and calculate collision, because there's that management aspect, but then how do we create policies so in the future, universally, we have to abide by putting technology on a satellite so that we can manipulate it in orbit and we can bring it back down safely. And so that's that question right now. The light pollution. This is another policy that I was happy to see that Germany took into effect last year. In fact, it's still being discussed. There was a proposal in Germany on a policy to dim lights. Now that was twofold as well. And that was not just for the adverse effects of astronomical observation and study, but also because there was a 75% decline in the insect population. And biodiversity in animals, wildlife in a diminuing percentage that intense is significant. And so knowing that this is a country that's taking measures toward improving policies to safeguard actually was pretty impressive. So you can see online tracking that this year they're going to continue to discuss how do we put that in effect. Dimming lights from dusk till dawn, 10 months a year is what it's calling for. So there are actions taking place that are around us, affect us. I make note, maybe because I've been in so many countries where the lights are really dominant at night, but I do make comments sometimes. It's so dim I can't see outside. And I remember, yes, because there's a policy, and some cities are practicing that now. So next slide. These all to say, we know that there's satellites. We know that there's technology at hand, and we know there's a heavy budget towards that. But then how can we get involved and either participate, learn more, or contribute? And there were so many ways in Europe to do that. And I had to learn when I came to Europe to start doing my work and my research and collaborations. What is it that's accessible, and what is it that you can do? So I'm going to give you 9 resources today that can help, and then we can have a conversation about how is it that you can get further within it. So the ESA, the European Space Agency, has so many resources. And in fact, it has a few offices spread to have these resources at hand. The ones that I'm going to share today, this business incubator is amazing. It is helping private sector get involved, and it actually launches proposals where if you have an innovation, you have every right to propose that. And you can collaborate on something that matters in your life, in your environment, in your neighborhood, in your city. So the one that's closest here, there's a whole list online, is in Germany, near what I think is an amazing place. It's the European Space Operations Center. That's your second resource. That is basically the team that's doing all your space traffic management. They're looking at space debris. They have so many resources and so much information on how you can get involved and how you can learn more about what are the satellites in orbit? How many are there? Should we send more? How does that affect me? And how do I get access in a rural area to that technology? So the third one for ESA is in Italy, and that's the Center for Earth Observation, one of my favorite teams. And this is the Phi Lab. And so you see there the Phi symbol. The Phi Lab has all of the artificial intelligence and machine learning and deep learning technology from satellite data, using it for Earth challenges. So I'm very endeared to the work they're doing because I believe it is enormous. They look at wildfires, digital twin Earth. They look at agriculture, like Francesca mentioned, tracking, logging, and deforestation. There are so many use cases of Earth observation technology that you can have access to. You can request it, you can go into their space records, and you can actually see what is it that technology has the ability to do, and how can I use it in my programs or in my future projects. Next slide. And not only that, there are free courses that you can actually take. So as you see here, the S4D4C is a science diplomacy course. You get certified, and it is absolutely free. I took this course, and many of my colleagues have taken it. It is a deep dive in how all the European network works together to make policy, to advocate for change, and really for you to have access to how can I articulate my needs as a citizen to any country within Europe and say, this is how I would like to be a part of the diplomatic discussion. This is how I would like to advocate for the need of my country, my city, and my use of satellites, of any science technology, and it's free. Space Watch Global, also one of my favorite teams, and that's because they have an online magazine, they have a webinar series, and they have a podcast. All the latest science and space science that you would like to learn about happens on a daily basis, and it happens on a weekly basis. And you have access to some of the leading women at UNUSA, the leading women of the German Aerospace Center, leading women in the industry who are on podcasts giving how and what they're working on, why it matters, and how you can contact them to get involved. They also have options for you as a citizen to write opinion pieces. So you can share your concerns. And you have the right to write in and say, I would like to have a conversation about how space technology investment matters in Germany. And why aren't we doing X, Y, Z? Well, you can put that to an opinion piece and you can have a conversation and a dialogue and engage with the community. So that's a free service. And then we have the European Center for Weather Forecast. This is where you see all your technology from satellite data working with ESA and predicting weather forecasts, agriculture, storms, aerosol. How do we track it? And how do those predictive models use further technology from artificial intelligence and machine learning? And they also are very concerned with the future of being able to predict. Next slide. So these final resources, I mean, the list is not exhaustive, but these were some that I think are pretty active and that are really accessible. Planet Labs is here in Berlin. They are a phenomenal group with satellites that they call doves, taking a photo of Earth, all over the Earth, every 5 to 10 minutes. I forget how many minutes, but it's pretty high frequency. You can access and pay to get photos from your farm, from your crop, from your city, and you can actually get the photos that you want for a certain amount of time or pay for a year of those photos. And you can see the changes from satellite data of the same spot on Earth every single day. This is how you track logging, fires. This is how we track deforestation and illegal activity. You can even track the migration of people and animals. So Francesca was very right. We have the ability because every single minute of the day, you are under a satellite camera. There is not an inch of the Earth that you can walk without being on camera. And so Planet Labs has that ability for your business or for your personal use. You purchase and you're able to use that data for presentations or for even making cases on investment. And the best thing is that they're here in Berlin. The German Aerospace Center. That is a massive organization that is doing phenomenal Earth observation work. It is, for all intents and purposes, a space agency, and it is accessible. Most of the work is done in Cologne, but they have offices and teams outside of Berlin who are working on some phenomenal astrobiology work. So when you go onto their website, you will see there's space medicine, there is science, there is flight test engineering. There are such a range of applications, and they care about disaster mitigation. They care about Earth's challenges, and they really do want innovation from the citizens to get involved. They even offer a PhD postdoc opportunities to work with them. So there's always that opportunity. And last but not least, an effort that is dear to me because I helped found it, for young women, young girls, ages 13 to 17, there is a group of STEM ambassadors who were inspired by the Mercury 13, and they're called the Possum 13. And they actually do an annual competition for microgravity challenges for young girls all over the world. So any student group between 13 and 17 can go online. This year, it's not happening because of COVID, but next year it will resume. And you can either get a mentor for this group, you can learn about microgravity testing and creating an experiment. And every year, normally, we choose and select one group who then select a member to fly with us on a microgravity flight. And so we pay that for them. And so last time we had a 16-year-old young woman from Colombia come to Canada, and she flew on a microgravity flight with us with her experiment. So next slide. So those are just some resources. And this photo here, I have to say, this is one of the Apollo sites, but this is part of my team. And if you know, we took this photo because we realized we were all women on this Apollo site. Engineers, astronomers, geologists, pilots, medical doctors, all together here working on an Apollo site that was a replica of the moon. And we took the opportunity to remember this moment. So hope you enjoy that. Thank you so much for having me. My contact information is here, but I'm so happy to answer any questions that you might have. I know it was a lot. Thanks so much.
It was a lot. I'm not sure if we want to give people a moment to collect their thoughts, start to put questions in the Q&A tool, but I have a lot of questions that I want to ask in any case. So I want to maybe get started with that while we're waiting for questions to appear. The very first thing that you said that triggered an instant, why is that in my mind was, why should our tax dollars go to space tech? And I think that's a question that, depending on what your interest is in various global issues, is still a little bit unclear in terms of what the immediate benefits are. So if you could tell a little bit more about what happens in terms of space tech funding or lack thereof, that would be great.
That's the $1 million question. And I have to say, it's different for every country, right? Because you have the investment for the US, which I'm very used to. You have the investments of the European Space Agency, and you have Roscosmos, which is for Russia, and JAXA for Japan, and Canadian Space Agency. Collectively, everything that they've put together, you will hear in a lot of conversations that all of the applications from space technology more than pay back for the investment that was made. Now, are there statistics and actual numbers that I can give you? No. But for example, here in Europe, it works very differently than the US. But ultimately, you're the taxpayer and it's your money and it's part of the pot. Because you have a space agency that's collective with all the nations in Europe that are contributing to it, it's not just for one country. The investments that go into it are a reflection of the investments from each country's will to work within the agency. And then that's the conversation that happens at the policy level. What matters to each country? Well, what matters to each country is what's advocated for by its people. I can say that when you think about 1,800 applications on a list, the reason that list even is in existence, and I'll be honest, is NASA had to put together a justification to its taxpayers, and that was in 1970s, and say, the reason we're putting so much money into a program that none of you are even part of, but you can see it on TV or you can hear about it, is because it's going to give you this back. Well, it's going to give you, better medical access. It's going to give you better technology for prosthetic legs and limbs. It's going to give you X, Y, Z. So the list now, the reason it was given annually was to update the taxpayer every year. This is how much money went into the program. This is what percentage of your taxes it was. And this is now how for the rest of your life, that technology is going to help you in your food, your safety on roads, how that's going to allow you to have access to internet. And the value of that was to justify why so much was going into it. Now, some, you're right, don't get enough. And I would say sometimes we don't even know the power we have as a citizen of our country to advocate for what we want to see out of a program. And it starts with where do I go? What do I say? And how do I have the power to write and say, and to who, that I want this technology to improve the health of cancer patients. I want more radiation experiments to be done. And then you can help guide what that is. But honestly, it depends on which country. I'm just learning here. But universally, there's a lot that I would say similar across countries to say, well, if there's money going in, I want to know how I have the ability to be part of guiding and influencing that so I can see it in my everyday life.
I want to go back to the allusion you made to space debris. And you talked about essentially there being this litter problem or garbage problem in the skies. My question to you is, isn't that really an issue of more surveillance than anything else? If we're talking about satellites being sent up into space with no plan to decommission them and bring them back down. The byproduct of that is that you have traffic problems and you have maybe collisions, which cause debris and particle proliferation. But is the issue really one of lots of space exploration leading to surveillance type technologies, or is it just a byproduct of having lots of cars, let's say, in outer space?
Oh, it's such a good question. Again, what I said, and I certainly believe this is probably the main causal factor of what's happening, is that we get excited about technology. We build a car, we put it on the road, we start testing it, everybody wants a car, but we didn't put together traffic lights or rules for how you drive and engage in driver's licenses and this ahead of that. It was the car came first. Similarly, it is so affordable, and much more so than a rocket to launch a human, is so much more affordable for a country to get access to space, right? When you talk about emerging space nations, nations who don't have a space agency yet, who are emerging into the sector, and when you talk about marginalized communities who have no space sector built yet whatsoever, you think the access point for them is putting a CubeSat, a small satellite, or a satellite, and that going up is their point of leverage into the community. It's accessible, it's affordable. The issue then becomes there are no universal policies for space launchers that they have to apply, like minimum criteria universally, that really make it accountable, like make you accountable for sending that object up, either a country or an individual company, to be accountable for that asset. So you had decades of assets being put up because everybody wanted internet, or justifying that we have access to space, or saying, hey, we're the first African country to put a satellite in space. And those are momentous, those are inspiring moments, right? So you can't argue that children in a country, when they see their first satellite go up, are not excited. And then they get access to internet, and there's so many different points of real leverage after that for learning and for innovation. But their policy levels, or the policies and the laws and the legal frameworks around us, are so tough, because even to this day we wonder, who manages that space traffic? Who do we trust is really we're doing that in our best interest? And that's country to country. Do we want to say that only the US is tracking that? And will all countries trust that their objects are on the list to not get collided with? These are the issues that are standing. Because behind it all, right, is human behavior and human interaction and collaboration. And so all these things are coming together, and they're coming together at a head now really fast, because commercial sector is on fire. I can go into a program and create a satellite tomorrow, and I don't even know. I don't know, to just be honest, if anyone would say, here's the list of standard criteria that you must meet for deorbit, or you must be able to manipulate it. I don't know that it's going to be consistent across all launchers. So that's the issue right now.
So does that mean that, let's say I'm a billionaire, I have nothing better to do on my weekend, but launch something into space because I can? Are you saying that there are a few countries in which I might be prohibited, or I might have some minimum criteria for even launching my satellite? Or are you saying that I would be able to launch my satellite, and the issue is there would be no one checking that I have a plan to bring it back to Earth?
The latter. There's no plan. There's no one holding everyone accountable consistently to even being able to onboard, put a machine learning on board a satellite, right? We call it onboard. ML on board isn't even mandated. So even if I launch something, it wouldn't be consistent across all launchers to say you need to have remote capability to manipulate that asset. And then you have to have a deorbit plan, not consistently across all. And that's where we are right now. We're trying to manage how and when will that policy level framework come together across the board. And I have to say, we're in the middle of those conversations in that international dialogue.
That's pretty scary. That's pretty scary information. Another thing that this brings to mind and that your presentation generally showed was that it sounds as if there's lots of cross-functional social science, humanities, other different contributors to the types of technology that are included on these space missions. That's something that we struggle in the digital technology sector to achieve. It's often more of a competition. There's much less willingness to rely on non-science-based expertise in the development and the furthering of various types of technology. Do you feel like this is one of the strengths of the space technology area, that it has such a cross-functional reach?
I do. I have to say, if anything gives me hope, I always say this, and I agree with my colleagues who first coined this. Our team of researchers, as an example, it's basic. We're all dreamers, but then we're making it happen. Like, we dream of space, we dream of a future where we can put technology up there, and so we dream it up, we imagine it, we innovate together, and we collaborate. And I have to say, the one thing I've seen in Europe, in Germany, in all the countries I've worked in Canada, in the US, is that there's always multidisciplinary need for everything we're doing. I can't work on a microbiology experiment in space without having a team of experts with all different backgrounds. It can't just be me, and it just can't be 4 engineers. I'm constantly working and surrounded by not just engineers, but botanists, pilots, medical flight surgeons. And we all collectively understand that each individual experiment, or even together on one experiment, mandates that we work together and that we bring technologies together, because they're so integrated. They're cross-cutting, they're integrated. I still work on programs in the humanitarian field. And so imagine the projects that I work on for Africa, any given country in Africa. It's not what it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, go work on a nutrition project in this emergency situation. Go work on a water project for this refugee camp. It used to be very siloed. And I will tell you now, more than 2 decades later, these programs, they have to be integrated. And I always think this is exactly what happens when you're planning for space, for a habitat, for transport. I have to consider all the resources and all their application within a hostile environment, just like I do in a conflict zone, in a war zone. What does it matter that someone can grow food here within a war and conflict? What does it matter where the latrines are? Where does it matter where their food is being grown? It all is connected. And I think that interconnected is what you're getting at. Even on the ISS, we've had a space station for 25 years, and it has not been one nationality. We've had multiple nationalities up there, and they've had to work together. And it's a really beautiful coming together of culture, discipline, generations, languages. And it's been a really great example of how the future is going to look. Or at least I'm optimistic about that.
That's incredibly encouraging and good to hear. And on that same note, we have a question from the audience, from Sarah, who's asking if there are any initiatives currently to include people from countries which are so behind in the sector that they don't even exist in the space tech sector. In other words, is the same mistake repeating itself on realizing too late that diversity matters? Or are you seeing indications that we're doing a better job of including different nationalities and different groups?
Well, and I would say that's a really relevant question. So thank you, Sarah, for that. Yeah, there are a lot of groups working, and I would say I didn't put this on the list, but one that I'm helping to head up is called Space for All Nations. Space for All Nations, and I'll put the email up in a moment. This group is in 46 different countries, are represented by 46 researchers. And what we do is we actively engage in partnerships, like right now, Senegal, Ghana, Indonesia, Portugal, and we bridge access to either elementary, intermediary, university, any academia, or directly with governments, and say, we can bridge access to our researchers for free. You can do research with us, science experiments, robotics, AI, remote sensing. We have a whole list of disciplines that we work with. And if that's an access point for your students and for your country, we can start working on that. And then you have access to our facilities. So whether you can travel or not, every year we can test it in microgravity, we can test it in a geological field, we can test it underwater, we can do egress training. There's a host of environments that we can actually offer to get someone started and to get a team started. So we work actively to do that. And I'll put the email here so that you can share it with the audience, but that's one. You were going to start seeing what's really interesting. Okay. A lot of programs that put the word either humanity or space and humanity, human space. These are the kind of groups that are starting to come together and or have been coming together to say, we have access for you. And I think these are a lot of places where you can have a starting point. Certainly for Space for All Nations, we are on a weekly basis being introduced to groups who have zero space. They have zero science experience, but they want it. And so we start from zero all the way up to, we have a space agency, but we'd like to put an education program in. And so there's a spectrum. So I would say, Sarah, for that, the answer is yes, there are opportunities, and definitely for countries even at starting at zero.
To follow up on the question of the different countries and the different levels that they're at in terms of space tech, in the 60s, you had an international competition. You had the space race that was getting to the moon. It was about prestige. It was about technological dominance. Is there a space race that's happening now? And if so, where are we racing to? What are we trying to do? And what do you think is driving that?
Oh, so many good questions. My opinion, because I see a lot of things happening. So here's the thing, there's so much information, and if you're on the Twitter and you're on the Instagram and you're on the Slack channels and there's so many Slack channels and WhatsApp groups and Signal and Telegram and, all the associations out there working on space who are comprised of all the industry professionals. At any given moment, there are hundreds of programs that are being invested in to advance technology and innovation, and to include more and more voices. Just yesterday, we were having a conversation on Clubhouse that was with the disability conversation. Is there a place for disability in space, in the space industry? What are the stigmas? How do we overcome that? And even though ESA launched the para-astronaut feasibility announcement, there are still some disabled colleagues who are engineers, who work really hard, who still aren't eligible. So now they're putting together their force forward to say, we still want to be included, and we're going to help you do research so that we can make sure that there's progress and that we are included in the future, not just in science and space engineering, but in human spaceflight eventually. So I think there's this arc you're going to see of the space race right now is really in launchers, right? Rocket launchers. You see in Europe, I'm fascinated by the Ariane team and how much work they do, and really to match the pace and to be just as competitive as a SpaceX. That's the pinnacle for commercial space industries. How do we create that? How do we replicate that? How can we save money to be the same reusable rocket launchers? That's a huge, from what I see, incentive for engineering and aerospace companies to really invest in space. How can we make sure the technology that we use is reusable and we're not investing every time to start over at the same starting point? I see that that's one of the biggest races to space is how can commercial access to space be global, not just US based? I think that's a huge one.
Speaking of commercial access to space, that leads nicely into my next question, which is about the satellite imaging that you mentioned that a private company here in Berlin offers, that anyone can participate in, can purchase whatever level of detailed imagery they want. Question, what restrictions exist around purchasing, utilizing satellite imagery of different areas in Europe?
I I don't know. But Planet, when you go into purchase, will let you know what you have access to, what locations you have access to. I ordered one, I have to say 2 years ago, just for a project in Africa. And it took time to like make sure, review it was accessible. And then I got the information and it was, Bahamas. It was Bahamas. It was for the hurricane. So I did the hurricane response to Hurricane Dorian, and there was no way to tell where the coastline was. We purchased that satellite data for access to see what did the island look like before, where were the assets in the homes and families, and where was our search effort going to take place, because the water line was so far up. And we had no previous images recent enough to tell. But when we got the Planet data, it was allowed. It was offered to us, and there was no restriction. So I think they would probably let you know if there was a restriction. I can't imagine knowing that here in Europe unless you asked.
Okay.
But but another source of information is there is something called the Disaster Charter. The Disaster Charter is free, open access satellite data during an emergency. And if you engage and sign the Disaster Charter, it was a effort that came out of the UK Space Agency. It was actually Chris Lee who told me about this. You sign that in an emergency, you can get access for a certain amount of time to free satellite data to help you in your emergency. So a lot of African countries will enact that, or Asian countries during flooding. You can enact that charter for a certain amount of time to help your country in recovery efforts.
Okay. And just to circle back with a last question, while I see that there's none that are pending, in terms of, well, and next to last question, in terms of this, you've mentioned one of the initiatives you're involved with, Space for All Nations, and that there are differing levels of support available via charters and so on to accessing data created by satellite missions and various space activities of wealthier nations. Does it boil down to a matter of money?
To be involved, or long-term stability and involvement?
To have some say and some access to the innovation and the research outputs of these space exploration activities.
So this one's hard. And I say that quite genuinely because it could be said that there's some points of entry into conversations at policy level that you need to have an investment in. But there are so many ways for a country to be involved, maybe not necessarily be an influencer yet, but the steps to being an influencer have to be in their own hands, which means having access to the set of resources that I put on that list. Those are accessible. If a country has no influence or dominating decision-making voice on any platform, some of the steps to take are, one, collaborations with private sector, collaborations with commercial sector, and definitely science collaborations within Europe with companies and institutes that are actively engaged with space agencies. And I would say that is a great starting point. So you don't necessarily need to have a budget within your government structure to have involvement and to be plugged in. It is a matter of relationships. It's definitely a matter of collaborations. And if there's a starting entry relationship that can get you to be working with an organization that has influence, that is always a really nice first step for a country that doesn't have a budget yet, for an institute that doesn't have a willing government. There's so many institutes across many countries, their government is not willing to even have this conversation, right? They're like, forget even having a financial structure for it or budget. We don't have interest in that. You have to find that opportunity on your own. And so you're gauging, but that entry point can be through these relationships and partnerships.
And so as the final question I have for you, this question about why should we care? What's driving this competition? How can countries that have maybe less influence or less budgetary flexibility than others get involved? You mentioned in passing earlier when we spoke one of the key areas of research in space research, which is about the biosphere and maintaining and sustaining life outside of the Earth in low resourced areas, particularly based on, and this is what got me, the limited capacity of plants to absorb carbon dioxide.
There's a saturation point. And so there's this larger climate conversation, environment conversation that has so much to do with even the work that we're doing. So our institute started with polar mesospheric cloud research, which is what we still do, noctilucent clouds. You can see them actually from Germany during the summer. And these clouds indicate climate change, but they're ice clouds in the upper mesosphere, and they have not really been studied really at depth. All the climate research that takes place, all of the environmental, I would say, benefits of space technology and satellites that we use here on Earth are pretty pivotal in gauging and predicting not just what do I wear tomorrow because the Weather Channel told me there's 100% chance of snow, but what am I going to do in 20 years? What should I be preparing for? And what are my everyday actions contributing to? Because I need to know that. So I can make decisions in my everyday life of what I'm eating, what I'm using to get to work, and choices within my home. And one thing that got me, the Biosphere 2 is a habitat that was built in Arizona in the US. Now, for everyone to know, there are so many habitats, these kind of artificial domes and structures that are built to simulate life, either on the moon, Mars, and they really help us in the last 2 decades. They've helped us to really ascertain human behavior in a confined environment. How do we grow food in a confined or extreme environment? And really, Biosphere 2 is the most sealed environment that was built. That said, it not only did an experiment with astronauts for a few years, it now has really been the host to rainforest, ocean, and desert climate and biodiversity studies for the last 2 decades. And I went on a tour, I was telling you earlier, and I was shocked when the researchers said, oh, so here we've already found the saturation point of plants, the carbon dioxide saturation point. And we asked, what does that mean for us on Earth? They said, well, Biosphere 2 is the dome. Biosphere 1 is our Earth, our Pachamama. And Biosphere 1, where we live now, where you and I sit now, Earth, has a saturation tipping point. And that could happen as early as the 2070s. Now, I was alarmed because I said, well, what does that mean? Not just for me, because I'll be an older woman. What does that mean for the next generation? And what does that mean for technology? What should we be working on now to ensure at a rapid rate that we create the ability for more carbon dioxide to be turned into oxygen? And I think that's something that at large should be a concern, obviously, but it should be also inspiring us to work on that. That should be a priority. And what am I doing in my everyday life? I had to look up afterwards, what am I doing every day that's contributing to that? Because I can't contribute to that. I need to reverse that or find a solution. And so things like this, you look it up. I walk everywhere. I take a bike everywhere. I don't drive a car. That was my personal option. You saw Germany passed, or Europe, not just Germany, Europe passed the mealworms are now allowed to be a replacement protein for beef. And this is an option that, even though at first you're like, oh, what? A mealworm? I'm not going to eat that. Of course you are. If you are concerned, you have that option now. And it's been approved. And you're not leaving your carbon footprint by one choice in your life, right? So it's these incremental ways that once you're informed, it's not to scare you, it's to arm you with information so you can make decisions or you can be part of a solution, right? there's a lot to learn. You can go online to Biosphere 2, that you get the website, and you will see there's phenomenal research being done in that habitat.
And is that an international effort, or is that US based? It's based in Arizona. Is it, who's overseeing all of this?
The University of Tucson, the University of Arizona in Tucson. So I think just, I have to say in 2020, NASA was reintroduced. I don't know about their international partners, to be honest, but I know they should have collaborations, but I don't know who else internationally is working with them. But
one last comment I would have to say, how is it possible? So if this Biosphere 2 is based in the United States, one of the centers of climate change denial, how is it possible for these two things to coexist? Huge amounts of money being spent on space research and lots of findings from that space research and the Biosphere project that prove that we have limited time, we're destroying our oxygen supplies, there's not a good alternative for removing carbon dioxide. How is it possible for these things to be well-funded at the same time as cars are everywhere? Beef consumption is at an all-time high. How do these things coexist, do you think?
Well, I observed that it wasn't government funded. You remember, private sector has that ability, commercial sector has that ability to autonomously study and continue the work, right? So that institute was from a university and from public funds, and they had their own non-governmental funds all these years. NASA coming back in, I don't know what the investment is from NASA. I'm sure it's probably on the website, but knowing that it had that autonomy, and like a lot of research institutes, right? We don't get government funding either at the institute. Ours is privately funded, personally funded from all our students. And what we put into it is for us to get the research we want out and the publications we want out without being restricted. So we have unrestricted means, just the way that I think this research institute did. And I think there's some magic in that, right? You still have the ability to put out information that's important, critical to a cause, and critical to action. I mean, that's what we hope for. Eventually it's not just like Sarah was asking, how do countries that start at zero or don't have any space industry, how do they start? It really is about what action are they willing to take, and at what level. That isn't tied to a policy investment. It isn't tied to a government agenda or to anyone's agenda. And so I think you have to be on the lookout for those opportunities. I see all the information come across my desk. And I'm an optimist, thank goodness. And I'm always seeking out, what's the solution? Okay, I see this has happened. What can we do about it? Because I'm going to tell you, I was in Haiti right after the earthquake. I was in Afghanistan during the bombings. I was in DR Congo during the rebel insurgency. I was in Sierra Leone right immediately after Ebola was contained. You go into these contexts that are surreal, that you see on the news. And the reality is, we as humans are extremely resilient, and we find solutions immediately, and we survive. And we have found a way to thrive through all adversity, and we reinvent and recalculate our social constructs to be better and to overcome. And I really have the feeling that all of that combined knowledge, all of these scientists, all of the analogs, all of the space technology is for and towards a more progressive future. And I really believe that. As long as what you said happens, is that we all come together, right, to put our disciplines together. So I'm optimistic about it coming together.
And the final question is, just came up in the Q&A tool. How do you deal with the frustration? You've just said you're an optimist, and we can see that you're very positive in your outlook. But in terms of frustration, when you hear all of these non-scientists denying scientific-based research about our concerns about the Earth and about the limited time that we have and the resources that we are working with, how do you deal with that frustration?
So that's important, because that question is at a lot of levels, right? You're looking at within teams, specific personality of aerospace teams, of space industry teams, of commercial and private, even not in the space industry, you're going to deal with that question of frustration. The one thing I always do is I acknowledge it. We have to acknowledge it. You don't hide things under the rug. I don't brush away the negative comments. I say, okay, ask questions. Why is it that way? What is the wall that we're hitting? Let's find out what are the other ways around that wall. Because for every wall, there's a window open. And for everything that the frustrations that I see and the conversations that I take part in active programs. I contribute to the dialogue, sure. But sometimes you're right, the dialogues are circular, right? They come right back to the same people, the same topics, the same conversations. And so when I engage, I have intent. I acknowledge what's happening. I have intention about my conversations. If you show up, I know that you mean to have a solution. If I show up, I know I want a solution. And I will always also show up to those frustrating conversations with a few options. And I've always done that because even in contexts that are really rough, because trust me, these kind of the attitudes and the questions that are frustrating even happen in the humanitarian sector. And we're like, oh, it's impossible to reach that community. They're too far. It's impossible to bring that much water in. It is impossible that, I hear that word and I'm like, impossible doesn't exist. We are going to find a way because there is one. And I have to say, with the ingenuity of people, you'd be surprised what can be created from almost nothing to find a possible solution. So when I'm frustrated with a conversation, I acknowledge it. I'm not deterred by it. And I see opportunity in it to say, okay, I'm glad you're questioning that. I'm really glad to be debated or put to question. And then I learn from that. So I think that's what I do with it.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate this time and these questions. It is such a deeply, I would say, satisfying industry to be in. And it is also deeply troubling because there's so much work to do. But the point is that there's so much work, there's room for everyone to contribute. And we need more people to contribute and definitely more women and young women to contribute.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you also.
Thank you, Francesca. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me and for having this conversation.
Yeah, it's really important. It was mostly was extraordinarily interesting for me because it's not my field, but maybe it's going to be a little bit
now?
My field of yeah, because
well,
it was really interesting. Yeah. Thank you
I hope
very
all
much.
of that helped. Yeah, and I hope the resources are accessible to everybody. So.
Yeah. We will put them on this video will go on YouTube, and we will put the links also on the YouTube side.
And also, if anyone has questions for me or needs more explanation and was too shy to ask today, I certainly welcome questions. I'm very responsive, and any question, nothing's too dumb. We offer also my team a safe space for any age, any background, any language. I have Google Translate. So to please not be shy if you really want to learn more. We serve as catalysts, right? We try to connect everybody.
Yeah, that's great.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, then thanks to all the listeners. Thanks to you, Nekima, too. And I think at least we can stop the stream now and the recording.